They were not loud. They were not rude. They were not breaking any rules. Yet a flight attendant shouted at them in front of an entire plane. 3 black triplets, matching Santa hats, valid tickets, and still, they were treated like a problem that needed to be removed. If you've ever been stared at, talked down to, or singled out for no clear reason, this story will feel uncomfortably familiar. Because what happened next wasn't about a flight. It was about power, about who gets questioned and who gets believed. Here's the part no one expected. The girls didn't argue. They didn't cry. They didn't explain themselves. They waited. And exactly 7 minutes later, the balance of power on that plane shifted in a way no one saw coming. Not the passengers, not the crew, not even the airline itself. Stay with this story because the ending isn't just shocking, it's justice. Before we begin, support Waves of Justice by liking and subscribing. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments. The cabin of the Skyward Vale flight felt tight and restless as boarding finished. Rows of gray seats stretched forward, and soft engine sounds hummed under low voices. In the middle row sat 3 young girls who looked exactly alike. Their names were Leora, Senna, and Calix Rowan. Each wore a bright red Santa hat pulled low over neat curls and matching red coats buttoned to the neck. They sat straight, hands folded, eyes wide with quiet excitement. It was their first winter flight alone, and they had planned the outfits for weeks, laughing about how people might smile when they saw them together. Passengers nearby noticed them right away. Some smiled. A few raised phones for quick photos. The girls did not pose or wave. They stayed calm and polite, whispering to each other about clouds and snow, and whether they might see the ocean from above. Their boarding passes were tucked neatly in the seat pocket. Everything was in order. Then Elowen Price stepped into their row. Elowen wore a dark blue uniform with sharp lines and a pin that caught the cabin light. Her face was tight, jaw set, eyes fixed on the girls. She stopped close enough that the girls could smell her perfume. Leora looked up first. Senna followed. Calix stayed still, watching Elowen's hands. "What is this?" Elowen said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. Her finger pointed toward the Santa hats. "You cannot wear costumes on this flight." The girls froze. Leora opened her mouth, then closed it. Senna glanced at Calix, who shook her head just a little. Calix spoke softly. "These are hats. We wore them through security." Elowen's voice rose. "Do not talk back. You are causing a disturbance." Heads turned. The aisle grew quiet. A man across the row lifted his phone higher. Someone near the window whispered, "They're just kids." Elowen leaned in closer. "Remove the hats now," she said, "or you will be moved." Senna's hands trembled as she touched the brim of her hat. Leora swallowed hard. Calix kept her eyes on Elowen's face, calm but alert. "We are not bothering anyone," Calix said. "Our seats are correct." That was when Elowen shouted. The sound cut through the cabin like a snap. "I said remove them now!" Her finger jabbed the air inches from Calix's face. A few passengers gasped. A uniformed officer stood at the back, watching but not moving. The girls did not cry. They did not argue. Leora slowly lifted her hat. It slipped from her fingers and fell into the aisle. Senna followed, her face pale. Calix hesitated, then placed her hat on her lap. The red felt looked bright against her dark coat. Elowen straightened, satisfied. "Good," she said. "Next time, follow rules." As she turned away, Calix glanced down at the fallen hat, then up at the faces watching them. Her eyes held something new, quiet and steady. No one noticed when she slid her hand into her pocket and sent a short message. The plane doors were still open, and time had just started to work against Elowen Price. The plane door closed with a dull thud, and the cabin lights dimmed slightly as the safety announcement began. The voice over the speakers sounded calm, almost gentle, which made the moment feel stranger for Leora, Senna, and Calix Rowan. Their hats were gone, but the heat of embarrassment still sat heavy on their faces. Leora kept her eyes on the tray table, tracing the edge with her finger. Senna stared straight ahead, blinking fast so tears would not fall. Calix leaned back, her face calm, but her chest felt tight. Around them, the mood had changed. Passengers whispered behind hands. A woman across the aisle shook her head slowly. The man who had been filming lowered his phone, looking uneasy. No one spoke up. Silence pressed in, thicker than the engine hum. Airline Price walked down the aisle with quick, sharp steps, stopping to check seat belts. When she reached the Rowan sisters again, she did not look at them. Her shoulders were stiff, her chin high, as if the matter was finished. To her, it was routine. To the girls, it was not. Calyx reached into her pocket again, careful and slow. Her phone vibrated once, then went still. She did not smile. She only slipped it back, folded her hands, and waited. Minutes passed. The plane began to move. Outside the window, the runway lights slid by in long lines. Senna finally whispered, "Are we in trouble?" Her voice was small. "No," Calyx replied, just as quiet. "Not us." Leora glanced at her. "Then who?" Calyx did not answer. She looked forward, eyes steady, as if counting something only she could see. At the front of the plane, Airline poured herself a cup of water. Her hands shook just a little. She told herself it was nothing. Kids cause problems all the time. Rules were rules. Still, the image of 3 matching faces staring up at her would not leave her mind. There had been no shouting back, no tears. That calm had unsettled her. A soft chime sounded near the cockpit. Airline frowned. That chime was not for passengers. The lead attendant, Maris Holt, stepped out from the front, holding the intercom phone. Her face looked tight. "Airline," she said quietly. "The captain needs you. Now." Airline stiffened. "Is there a problem?" Maris did not answer. She only held out the phone. "It's important." Airline took it, forcing a polite smile for nearby passengers. She turned her back and pressed the receiver to her ear. "This is Airline Price." The voice on the other end was calm but firm. Too firm. "Please report to the cockpit," the captain said. "Immediately." Airline's throat went dry. "May I ask why?" There was a pause, then, "It concerns the Rowan passengers." Airline's eyes flicked down the aisle, landing on the 3 girls sitting quietly in their seats. Calyx met her gaze for a brief second. There was no anger there. Only patience. Airline hung up slowly. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears as she handed the phone back to Maris. "I'll be right back," she said, though her voice lacked its earlier sharpness. As Airline walked toward the cockpit, the plane lifted off the ground. Outside, the city lights fell away. Inside, something else was rising, unseen but unstoppable. The cockpit door closed behind Airline Price with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. Captain Brannick Hale stood near his seat, one hand resting on the console. He did not offer a greeting. His eyes were fixed on a tablet glowing in his hands. Beside him, the co-pilot kept silent, pretending to focus on the controls. Airline straightened her uniform. "Captain Hale, you asked to see me?" Brannick looked up slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Yes," he said. "I want you to explain what happened in row 14. Airline's jaw tightened. "There were 3 minors causing a distraction. They were dressed in costumes. I followed procedure." Brannick raised one eyebrow. "Procedure," he repeated. He tapped the tablet once and turned it so she could see. On the screen was a seating chart, highlighted in blue. 3 names stood out: Leora Rowan, Senna Rowan, Calyx Rowan. They were seated correctly, Brannick said. Their attire did not violate any written policy. Airline shifted her weight. "It was my judgment, sir." "That," Brannick replied, "is the problem." Before Airline could respond, another chime sounded. This one was different. Brannick's screen flashed with an incoming call marked priority. His expression changed not to anger, but to something closer to caution. He answered without a word. Airline watched his face as he listened. His posture stiffened. His free hand pressed flat against the console. After a few seconds, he glanced at her, then looked away again. "Yes," Brannick said into the receiver. "They are on board. Yes, all 3. Another pause. "Understood." He ended the call and set the tablet down carefully, as if it were fragile. Airline's voice came out thinner than she expected. "Captain?" Brannick turned to her fully now. "Do you know who the Rowan family is?" Airline frowned. "No, sir." Brannick nodded once. "I thought not." He picked up the tablet again and scrolled. "The Rowan Family Trust finalized a controlling investment in Skyward Vale Aviation last quarter. Quiet deal, No press. He looked at her. The 3 passengers you addressed are listed beneficiaries. The words landed heavy in the small space. Elowen laughed once, short and nervous. That's not possible. They're just children. Brannick's voice stayed even. Children can still own things, Miss Price, especially when the structure was built for them. Elowen felt her face grow warm. I didn't know, she said quickly. If I had, Brannick held up a hand. Knowing is not the issue. Conduct is. Another silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Outside the cockpit, the plane climbed higher, steady and smooth. Brannick continued, We have received a formal notice. It came through legal channels. Time stamped 7 minutes after the incident. Elowen's breath caught. 7 minutes? Yes, Brannick said. That tells me this was not a reaction. It was preparation. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. For now you will return to duty. You will not approach the Rowan passengers again. After landing, there will be a review. Elowen nodded stiffly. Understood. As she turned to leave, Brannick added one last thing. Ms. Price, he said, calm does not mean powerless. Remember that. Elowen opened the cockpit door and stepped back into the cabin. The engine noise rushed in around her. Down the aisle, Calix Rowan sat upright, hands folded, eyes forward. She did not look back. Elowen suddenly felt like the smallest person on the plane. Elowen Price walked back down the aisle, but her steps were no longer sharp. They felt measured, careful, as if each one needed permission. The cabin looked different now, the same seats, the same faces. Yet she sensed eyes on her from places she could not see. Whispers followed her movement, soft but steady, like a tide pulling back before a wave. She stopped 2 rows before the Rowan sisters and pretended to adjust an overhead bin. Her hands trembled. She forced them still. She reminded herself to breathe. The captain's words echoed in her mind. Calm does not mean powerless. Leora, Senna, and Calix sat quietly, just as before. But something about them felt changed. Their posture was relaxed, not defeated. Senna leaned slightly toward Leora, whispering something that made Leora's lips twitch, almost into a smile. Calix stared straight ahead, her face unreadable, her calm now carrying weight. A few rows back, the man who had filmed earlier leaned toward his seatmate. That attendant looks scared now, he whispered. Good, the other replied. Elowen heard none of this clearly, but she felt it. The air around her pressed in, thick with judgment she could not answer. At the front, Maris Holt watched her closely. Maris had worked the skies for nearly 20 years. She had seen storms form out of clear air before. She approached Elowen near the galley, lowering her voice. What did the captain say? Elowen swallowed. Nothing I can discuss. Maris studied her face. You're pale. I'm fine, Elowen said too quickly. Maris glanced toward row 14. Her expression changed just slightly. Those girls, she said, they haven't complained, not once. Elowen did not reply. She turned away, pretending to check a service card. Behind her, Calix Rowan finally moved. She reached into the seat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was thick, official-looking. She glanced at it once, then slid it back in. Leora noticed and raised an eyebrow. Is it time? Leora whispered. Not yet, Calix replied. Let it breathe. Senna hugged her arms. I don't like this. Calix turned to her, voice gentle. I know, but this is how it changes. Minutes passed. The plane leveled off. Drinks were served. Life tried to return to normal, but it failed. The tension stayed, stretched thin across every row. Then the intercom chimed. Maris picked it up first. Her eyes widened just a little as she listened. She nodded once, slowly. Understood, she said, then hung up. She looked straight at Elowen. They want the incident report now, Maris said. Not after landing. Elowen's stomach dropped. That's not standard, Maris shook her head. Neither was what happened back there. Elowen opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Her throat felt tight. She took the tablet Maris handed her and stared at the blank form. The words blurred. Time, place, reason, witnesses, witnesses. She glanced down the aisle again. Several passengers met her eyes without looking away. One woman folded her arms. Another shook her head slowly. Elowen's fingers hovered over the screen. She thought of how loud her voice had been, how close her finger had come to Calix's face, how quiet the girls had stayed. She began to type. Row 14 felt the shift before anyone spoke it out loud. Leora leaned back, sensing it. Senna exhaled, long and slow. Calix closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. Outside the window, the clouds spread wide and bright, untouched by the trouble inside the cabin. Inside, the balance had tipped. What began as a small act of control had opened something much larger, and the Rowan sisters were no longer waiting. The sound of typing filled the galley, soft but steady. Elowen Price stood hunched over the tablet, her shoulders tense as she worked through the incident report. Each question felt heavier than the last. Time of incident, reason for action, passenger response. She paused longer than she should have, especially when she reached the part asking whether the passengers had shown any sign of threat or disruption. She stared at the screen, then typed slowly. No. That single word made her chest tighten. Across the cabin, life continued in small, uneven pieces. Drinks were passed. Tray tables clicked open. A child a few rows back laughed, then was quickly hushed. But in row 14, the air stayed still. Leora Rowan leaned her head back against the seat. Her eyes were closed, but she was not resting. She was listening. Senna picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, her fingers moving in a nervous rhythm. Calix sat between them, calm and centered, her gaze moving quietly from aisle to window and back again. You said 7 minutes, Senna whispered. Calix nodded. That was when the notice went. Through, Leora opened her eyes. And now, Calix said, they decide how much they want to protect her. That word lingered. Protect. A man across the aisle leaned forward slightly. You girls okay? He asked in a low voice. Leora smiled politely. Yes, sir. You sure? His eyes flicked toward the front of the cabin. Calix met his gaze. We will be. He studied her for a moment, then nodded and leaned back. Something about her certainty settled him. Near the front, Maris Holt paced once, then stopped. She had received another message, this time marked internal priority. Her jaw tightened as she read it. She glanced at Elowen, who was still typing, then back at the message. Maris walked to the intercom phone and picked it up. Captain Hale, she said quietly. Elowen froze. She could not hear the response, but she could see Maris's posture shift, straightening, firm. Yes, Maris continued. I understand. I'll handle it. She hung up and turned to Elowen. They're sending someone from ground operations to meet the plane when we land, she said, along with legal. Elowen looked up sharply. Legal? Maris held her gaze. Yes. For a moment, Elowen said nothing. Then very quietly, am I being suspended? Maris did not answer right away. She looked past Elowen, down the aisle toward row 14. That's not my call, she said finally. But I will say this. I've seen a lot of complaints over the years. This one is different. How? Elowen asked. Because, Maris said, the people who were wronged didn't raise their voices. They didn't threaten. They didn't demand. They waited. Elowen's throat tightened. She thought of the way Calix had looked at her. Not angry, not scared, just patient. The seatbelt sign chimed on. The captain's voice came over the speakers, calm and even, announcing mild turbulence ahead. The plane shook, slightly, just enough to rattle nerves. Senna grabbed Leora's hand. Leora squeezed back. Calix placed her other hand over theirs, grounding them both. It's okay, Calix said softly. We're almost there. Almost where? Senna asked. Calix looked out the window, where the clouds had begun to thin. To the part where the truth shows. At the front, Elowen Price finished the report and hit submit. The tablet chimed once, sharp and final. She stared at the screen, then slowly set it down. For the first time since boarding, she felt the full weight of what she had done. Not just the rules she had bent, but the people she had tried to shrink. The plane moved forward through the sky, steady and unaware. But inside, the story had shifted again. Control had slipped from familiar hands, and it was not coming back. The plane settled into a smoother path, but the cabin did not relax. The earlier tension had changed shape. It was no longer sharp and loud. It was quiet, watchful, waiting. Elowen Price stood near the galley window, staring at nothing. Her reflection in the dark glass looked unfamiliar. The confidence she once carried felt thin now, like a uniform borrowed from someone else. Every sound made her flinch. A cartwheel rolling, a seatbelt click, a soft laugh from somewhere behind her. She replayed the moment again and again. The hats, the pointing finger, her own voice raised and hard. She had told herself she was keeping order. Now she wondered who she had really been trying to control. Maris Holt moved through the cabin with practiced ease, but her eyes missed nothing. She noticed how passengers watched Elowen now, not with fear, with judgment. That shift mattered. In row 14, the Rowan sisters sat together, unchanged on the surface, yet different inside. Senna's breathing had slowed. Leora's fingers rested still in her lap. Calyx remained steady, her calm no longer just personal but purposeful. "You haven't said what happens next," Leora whispered. Calyx glanced at her sisters, then back toward the front of the plane. "Next, they test us." Senna frowned. "How?" "They will try to soften it," Calyx replied. "Private apologies. Quiet offers. They will hope we accept peace instead of truth." Leora tilted her head. "Will we?" Calyx shook her head once. "We accept fairness, not silence." A flight attendant named Rhinal crossed the aisle and paused near their row. Unlike Elowen, her posture was careful, respectful. "Can I get you anything?" she asked gently. "Water, please," Senna said. Rhinal nodded and returned quickly, placing the cups down with care. "If there's anything you need," she added, her voice lower now. "I saw what happened." Calyx met her eyes. "Thank you." That was all. But Rhinal's shoulders relaxed, as if that small exchange had mattered. Up front, a message arrived on Maris Holt's device. She read it once, then, again slower this time, her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned toward the cockpit. Captain Brannock Hale listened without interrupting. When Maris finished, he nodded. "They're serious," he said. "They want this documented end to end." Maris hesitated. "What about the passengers?" Brannock exhaled. "They haven't asked for anything yet. That worries me more than if they had." Maris understood. People who demanded loudly often wanted quick wins. People who waited wanted change. The cabin lights dimmed further as the plane began its gradual descent. Outside, the sky deepened in color, streaked with gold and gray. Inside, a quiet reckoning drew closer. Elowen Price finally moved. She walked down the aisle slower than before, stopping 2 rows away from the Rowan sisters. She did not speak. She only stood there, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Calyx looked up. For a moment, neither said anything. The silence stretched, heavy and exposed. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that," Elowen said at last. Her voice was low, unsteady. "I was wrong." Calyx listened. She did not nod. She did not soften. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "But this is bigger than us." Elowen swallowed. "I know." Calyx held her gaze. "Then be honest when they ask you what happened." Elowen's eyes glistened, just for a second. She nodded once and stepped back, retreating toward the front. As she walked away, she felt something close behind her. Not anger, not punishment. Truth. And it was gaining ground fast. The descent continued, slow and steady, but time seemed to stretch inside the cabin. Every minute felt heavier than the last. The earlier noise of travel had faded into a low hum, as if the plane itself sensed the shift that was coming. Calyx Rowan checked the small clock on the seat screen. Less than 20 minutes to landing. She breathed in, then out, keeping her face calm. Inside, her thoughts moved fast, lining up steps that had been planned long before this flight ever existed. Leora leaned closer. "I don't like how quiet it is," she whispered. Calyx gave a faint smile. "Quiet means they are thinking." Senna glanced toward the front. "Or panicking." "That too," Calyx said. Up near the galley, Elowen Price felt the truth of that word. Panic. It sat in her chest, tight and burning. She had replayed the conversation with Calyx again and again. Be honest when they ask. Simple words. Heavy cost. Her device vibrated. A new message flashed across the screen. Ground operations confirmed. Review team present. Her hands shook as she locked the screen. Maris Holt approached her, voice low. They will speak to you first after landing. Elowen nodded. I know. Maris studied her. I need to ask you something, Elowen. Off record. Elowen looked up. Did you single them out because of the hats? Maris continued. Or because of who you thought they were? The question landed hard. Elowen opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer formed anyway, sharp and painful. Because of who I thought they were, she admitted. Maris exhaled slowly. Then say that. Because if you don't, someone else will. Elowen's eyes stung. She nodded once. Across the aisle, a woman who had been silent the whole flight leaned toward the Rowan sisters. I just want you to know, she said softly. You handled that with more grace than most adults I know. Leora smiled, small but sincere. Thank you. The woman hesitated. If they need witnesses, I'll speak. Calyx met her gaze. That may be needed. The woman nodded, then sat back, her hands folded with purpose. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time announcing final descent. Seat back straightened. Tray tables locked. The plane angled downward and pressure filled the cabin. Airline Price took her assigned jump seat, strapping in with stiff movements. Her heart raced. She stared straight ahead, but her thoughts raced toward the past. Smaller moments she had ignored. Times she had made quick judgments and never been questioned. She had believed power lived in authority. Now she saw how fragile that belief had been. The wheels touched down with a firm jolt. The cabin filled with the familiar sound of applause from a few passengers, but it was thin and scattered. No one relaxed. As the plane slowed, Calyx Rowan felt the final click fall into place. She reached into her pocket and typed a single word before the signal dropped. Now, Leora noticed. Is that it? Calyx nodded. From here on, it moves fast. The plane rolled to the gate and came to a stop. The seatbelt sign remained on longer than usual. No one stood. No one reached for bags. At the front, the door did not open. Instead, a figure appeared in the jet bridge window. Then another. Suits, badges, purpose. Airline Price closed her eyes. Justice had arrived, and it was no longer in the air. The cabin stayed still as minutes passed without the usual rush to stand. The seatbelt sign remained lit, and confusion rippled quietly through the rows. People shifted, glanced at their watches, then toward the front of the plane. Something was wrong, and everyone could feel it. The door finally opened, but not in the normal way. It swung wider and stayed open. Cool air moved in, sharp and clean. Two people stepped inside. A woman in a dark coat with a silver badge clipped to her belt, and a man holding a thin folder pressed to his chest. They did not smile. They did not look around. They walked straight to the front. Captain Brannock Hale rose from his seat and greeted them with a firm nod. You're expected, he said quietly. The woman returned the nod. I'm Corvin Slate from Skyward Vale Ground Review. This is Tamsin Rowe, Legal Oversight. Those names carried weight, even to people who did not know why. Murmurs spread like wind through dry grass. Airline Price unbuckled slowly, her fingers stiff. Maris Holt touched her arm. Be steady, she said. It was not comfort, it was instruction. Corvin Slate scanned the cabin once, her eyes sharp and calm. They stopped on row 14. Before deboarding, Corvin said clearly, we will address a reported incident. The words fell heavy. Some passengers gasped. Others leaned forward. A few looked away, already uneasy. Corvin continued, this will be brief. She turned slightly. Leora Rowan, Senna Rowan, Calyx Rowan. Every head turned. The sisters did not move at first. Calyx met Corvin's gaze and gave a small nod. Leora and Senna followed her lead, unbuckling together and standing in the aisle. Their movements were calm, practiced, and united. Airline Price watched them rise, her chest tight. They did not look small now. They looked certain. Corvin spoke again. You reported misconduct involving crew behavior. Yes, Calyx replied. Her voice was clear, not loud. We did. Do you wish to add anything before we proceed? Corvin asked. Calyx paused. She glanced at her sisters, then at the faces watching them. Only this, she said. We were treated as a problem before we were treated as people. Silence filled the plane. Tamsin Rowe opened the folder in his hands. Multiple passenger statements support this account, he said. Video included. A quiet wave of reaction moved through the cabin. Someone near the back whispered, "She recorded it." Corvin turned toward Elowen Price. "Ms. Price," she said, "you will step forward." Elowen's legs felt weak, but she obeyed. She stood in the aisle, the distance between her and the Rowan sisters suddenly small and very exposed. "Do you deny raising your voice?" Corvin asked. Elowen swallowed. "No." "Do you deny singling them out without policy cause?" Elowen closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and shook her head. "No." A low murmur moved through the cabin. Corvin raised a hand and it stopped. "Then this matter will continue off the aircraft," Corvin said. "Miss Price, you are relieved of duty effective immediately." The words hit like a sudden drop. Elowen's breath caught. Her face drained of color. She nodded once, unable to speak. Corvin turned back to the sisters. "You may remain seated until general deboarding begins," she said. "Thank you for your patience." Calix nodded. "Thank you for listening." As Corvin and Tamsin stepped back toward the door, the balance inside the cabin shifted completely. The power had changed hands, not with shouting or force, but with truth spoken aloud. Elowen Price stood frozen in the aisle, the weight of her actions finally undeniable, and the Rowan sisters sat back down together, calm as ever, knowing this was only the beginning. The cabin stayed quiet even after. Corvin, Slade, and Tamsin Rowe stepped back toward the open door. No one clapped. No one spoke. It was not that kind of moment. It was heavier, more thoughtful, as if everyone on the plane had been forced to look at something they usually ignored. Elowen Price remained standing in the aisle, unsure where to place herself now that her authority had been stripped away in front of everyone. Her uniform suddenly felt too tight, too visible. She glanced toward Maris Holt, who met her eyes with a look that held no judgment, only finality. "You should gather your things," Maris said quietly. "They'll escort you off first." Elowen nodded. Her hands felt clumsy as she reached into the overhead bin and pulled down her small bag. Each movement felt watched, not with anger, but with awareness. She passed row 14 slowly. For a brief moment, she considered stopping, saying more, explaining herself. But there was nothing left to explain. The damage had already spoken. Calix Rowan looked up as Elowen passed. Their eyes met. Elowen opened her mouth, then closed it. Calix gave a small, respectful nod. Not forgiveness, not punishment, just acknowledgement. That quiet gesture hurt more than anger ever could. Elowen walked off the plane with Corvin's slate behind her. The door closed again, softer this time. The seatbelt sign finally clicked off, but no one stood right away. Lyra exhaled slowly. "Is it over?" she asked. Calix shook her head. "The loud part is..." Senna hugged her arms. "I feel strange." "That's normal," Calix said. "Justice doesn't feel like movies make it look. It's quieter, heavier." Passengers began to stand at last, but many paused near row 14. Some offered nods. Others whispered words of support. A few said nothing but looked at the sisters with new respect. The woman who had spoken earlier leaned in again. "I meant what I said," she told them. "If they need me again, I'll speak." "Thank you," Lyra replied. As the aisle cleared, Corvin's slate returned briefly, stopping near the sisters. Her tone was professional, but not cold. "You will be contacted within 24 hours, she said. "There will be follow-up." "We expected that," Calix replied. Corvin studied her for a moment. "Most people would have demanded compensation, public apology. You didn't." Calix met her gaze. "Those things fade. Records don't." Corvin gave a small nod. "Understood." When the sisters finally stood to leave, the plane felt different. Not lighter, but changed, as if something had been named that could not be unnamed again. The terminal outside buzzed with noise and movement. Screens flashed. Luggage rolled. But a small group waited just beyond the gate. A man in a gray coat. A woman with a tablet. Another with a security badge. They watched the sisters approach. The man stepped forward first. "Calix Rowan," he said. "I'm Darnell Voss, interim, operations lead." Calix stopped. "We know who you are." Darnell nodded. Then you also know this isn't a courtesy meeting. No, Calix said. It isn't. They moved to a quieter corner of the terminal. Senna stayed close to Leora, fingers laced tight. Calix stood slightly ahead, her posture calm and firm. Darnell cleared his throat. The board is concerned, he said, not about the incident alone, about the pattern it represents. Calix said nothing. We would like your input, Darnell continued. Privately, before this spreads. Leora frowned. It already has, she said softly. Darnell hesitated. Yes, it has. Calix finally spoke. Then listen carefully. We did not board that plane looking for a test, but we were ready for one. The woman with the tablet glanced up, surprised. Calix went on. We want a full review of crew conduct complaints for the past 5 years. Not summaries, full records. We want the training. Material revised, not renamed. And we want an independent channel for passenger reports, one that does not disappear into internal silence. Darnell swallowed. That is extensive. So is the problem, Calix replied. Senna looked up at her sister, pride flickering through her nerves. Leora placed a steady hand on Senna's shoulder. Darnell nodded slowly. The board will push back. Calix's voice stayed even. They already know who holds the final vote. Silence followed. Darnell sighed. Then I'll be honest. This will cost the airline. Calix met his eyes. So does ignoring it. A long pause stretched between them. Finally, Darnell nodded again, deeper this time. We will schedule a formal session. Good, Calix said. We'll attend. As they walked away toward baggage claim, Senna finally let out a shaky breath. I didn't know we could do that, she said. Leora smiled gently. Neither did they. Calix said, nothing. She watched people pass by, unaware that something had shifted beneath their routine steps. Behind them, Skyward Vale Aviation began to change, not because it wanted to, but because it no longer had the choice. And for the first time since boarding the plane, the Rowan sisters allowed themselves to feel it. Not relief, resolve. The baggage claim hall smelled of metal, coffee, and damp winter coats. Conveyors rattled to life one by one, spitting out suitcases in uneven bursts. Travelers crowded close, eager to leave the airport behind. For Leora, Senna, and Calix Rowan, the noise faded into the background as they stood slightly apart, their coats still buttoned, their red hats now folded neatly and tucked under Calix's arm. They did not rush. They watched. Across the hall, Darnell Voss spoke quietly into his phone, his face tight with concentration. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked back toward the sisters. The woman with the tablet, Alira Finch, stood beside him, scrolling through notes, her expression serious. The security officer, Bram Kell, remained near the wall, arms crossed, observing the flow of people as if measuring something unseen. Senna shifted her weight. Everyone keeps looking at us, she murmured. Leora nodded. Not the same way as before. Calix knew what she meant. The stares were no longer curious or dismissive. They were careful. People were trying to place them, to understand what they represented now. A large black suitcase slid onto the belt. Calix stepped forward and lifted it off with ease. Leora and Senna followed, each taking a smaller bag. The simple act grounded them, reminding them that despite everything, they were still just moving through the world like everyone else. Darnell approached again, slower this time. There's one more thing, he said. The board would prefer this remain internal. Calix met his gaze. Of course they would. Elira Finch cleared her throat. They're worried about public reaction. Headlines. Loss of trust. Trust was already lost, Leora said quietly. This just showed it. Darnell sighed. If this becomes public, there will be pressure, sponsors, regulators. Calix adjusted her grip on the suitcase handle. Pressure is not the same as harm, she said, and silence protects the wrong people. Bram Kell shifted slightly, his boots scraping the floor. For what it's worth, he said, my sister flies this airline every week. I'd want her treated better than that. Calix nodded once. So would we. There was a pause, heavy and honest. Finally, Darnell stepped back. We'll be in touch, and he said, soon. As they walked toward the exit, Senna's shoulders sagged. The adrenaline that had carried her through the flight and the confrontation began to drain away, leaving behind exhaustion. Leora noticed and slipped an arm around her. "You did good," Leora said softly. Senna shook her head. "I was scared the whole time." "So was I," Leora replied. "That doesn't cancel what we did." Outside, cold air hit their faces, sharp and clean. The sky was low and gray, the kind of winter afternoon that pressed down on the city. Cars lined up at the curb, engines idling, drivers scanning for familiar faces. A dark sedan pulled up smoothly. The driver stepped out, tall and composed, wearing a long coat and a neutral expression. "Ms. Rowan," he said, nodding to Calix. "I'm Halvard Dane. I was sent to take you home." Calix nodded. "Thank you." As they settled into the back seat, Senna leaned her head against the window, watching the airport slide away. "Do you think it will really change?" she asked. Calix did not answer right away. The city blurred past, streets wet with melted snow. People hurried along sidewalks, unaware of the small storm that had passed through one plane and now followed these three girls home. "Change is slow," Calix said finally, "and it fights back." Leora looked at her. "Then why start it?" Calix turned to face her sisters fully. "Because if we don't," she said, "someone else will sit in that seat tomorrow, and the day after, and they might not have a voice ready." The car stopped at a quiet building tucked between taller offices. It was unmarked, plain, easy to miss. Inside, the lights were warm. A woman waited near the entrance, her hair pulled back, her posture alert but kind. "Welcome back," she said. "I'm Neris Vale." Calix smiled faintly. "We know." Neris gestured them inside. "The board has already requested an emergency session. They want to hear from you directly." Senna groaned softly. "Already?" Neris's smile held no humor. "They're afraid of what happens if they don't." Inside the meeting room, screens lined the walls, dark for now. Chairs sat neatly arranged around a long table. It felt too big for just 3 people, but Calix walked to the head without hesitation. She set the folded Santa hats on the table, right in the center. Leora raised an eyebrow. "You're bringing those?" Calix nodded. "They matter." Senna smiled for the first time since landing. As the room filled slowly with distant voices and incoming calls, Calix rested her hands on the table and closed her eyes for a brief moment. She thought of the aisle, the shouting, the hat on the floor. Then she opened her eyes again. The fight had moved to a new space now, quieter, more powerful. And this time, the Rowan sisters were already seated at the table. The screens along the meeting room walls flickered to life one by one. Faces appeared in neat squares, some sharp and alert, others guarded. Names glowed beneath them in small text. The board had assembled faster than Calix expected, which told her more than any greeting could have. Neris Vale moved to the side of the room, arms folded, silent but present. She did not sit. She watched. A man with silver hair cleared his throat on the largest screen. "We appreciate you joining on such short notice," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "What happened on that flight was unfortunate." Calix did not react to the word. Leora noticed and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Senna sat forward, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Unfortunate suggests chance," Calix said calmly. "This was a choice." The man blinked. A woman 2 screens over frowned slightly. Another voice joined in, lower and firmer. "We are reviewing internal conduct. That process is already underway." "That process," Calix replied, "has existed for years. Yet here we are." Silence followed, not the awkward kind, the kind where people weighed risk. Leora reached out and slid one of the folded Santa hats toward the center of the table. It stopped just short of the camera view. "These were called a disturbance," Leora said. But the real disturbance was how quickly authority was used without care. Senna added, her voice soft but steady. "We were treated like a problem that needed to be fixed, not people who needed to be heard." The silver-haired man shifted in his seat. "You must understand the pressure crew face." Calix raised her hand slightly. He stopped. "We do understand pressure," Calix said. "That is why systems matter. When pressure reveals bias, the system should stop it." Yours did not. Another board member leaned forward, her expression sharp. What exactly are you asking for? Calyx nodded as if she had been waiting for the question. First, she said, a full audit of passenger complaints related to conduct. Not summaries. Full records. We want to see patterns, not excuses. A murmur spread across the screens. Second, Calyx continued, training that is written and reviewed by people outside this company. People who are not invested in protecting its image. The silver-haired man frowned. That will slow operations. Good, Mycon, Leora said. Speed is not your problem. Judgment is. Senna swallowed, then spoke. Third, an independent reporting line. One that does not root back to the same managers who dismiss complaints as misunderstandings. The room went quiet again. Neris Vale stepped forward slightly. They are not making demands, she said evenly. They are setting conditions. The silver-haired man sighed. You realize what this could cost. Calyx met his eyes through the screen. We do. Another board member spoke up, voice tight. And if we refuse? Calyx did not hesitate. Then the footage, the statements, and the timeline will not remain private. The word footage changed everything. A pause followed. Long, heavy. Finally, the silver-haired man leaned back. We will need time. You have had time, Calyx replied. What you need now is courage. The man pressed his lips together. We will reconvene. Today, Calyx said. The screens went dark one by one. The meeting ended without ceremony. Senna let out a shaky breath. Did we just do that? Leora smiled faintly. We did. Calyx remained seated, staring at the dark screens. Her hands trembled just a little now that the moment had passed. She placed them flat on the table until they stilled. Neris Vale approached. They didn't expect you to be this prepared? Calyx nodded. They rarely do. Outside the room, the building remained quiet. No applause, no announcement. Change did not arrive with noise. It crept in, slow and stubborn. Leora stood and stretched. I'm hungry. Senna laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension at last. Same. Calyx gathered the hats and held them close for a moment before placing them back in her bag. We'll eat, she said. Then we wait. For what? Senna asked. For the pushback, Calyx replied. It always comes. As they walked out together, Calyx glanced back at the empty room. The table looked ordinary again, just wood and glass. But she knew what had happened there. A line had been drawn, and on the other side of it, things would never be as easy as they once were. The pushback came faster than Calyx expected. By the next morning, the air felt different. Messages stacked up on her phone before sunrise. Some were careful and polite. Others were tight, legal, trimmed of warmth. The board had reconvened late into the night, and now the cracks were showing. Leora sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her own screen, her brow furrowed. They're calling it a procedural review, she said. No mention of bias. Senna leaned against the counter, holding a mug she had forgotten to drink from. They're already trying to soften it. Calyx nodded. That was always going to happen. Outside, the Uriwai city moved on as usual. Buses hissed at stops. People hurried past windows, unaware of the tension building inside this small, quiet space. That contrast made everything feel sharper. A call came in from Darnell Voss. Calyx answered without greeting. They're nervous, Darnell said. His voice sounded tired. Some of them are asking why this needs to go so far. Calyx leaned back in her chair. Ask them why it didn't stop earlier. Darnell sighed. They're also questioning intent. Of course they are, Leora said from across the room. Calyx spoke into the phone. Intent is not the same as impact. You know that. There was a pause. Yes, Darnell admitted, but not everyone wants to say it out loud. Then let this be the moment they learn, Calyx replied. She ended the call before he could respond. Senna finally sat down. I keep thinking about Elo and Price, she said quietly, about how she looked at the end. Calyx did, not answer right away. She remembered Aloan's face too. Not angry, not defensive, just hollow. This isn't about destroying her, Calyx said. It never was. But it will, Senna said. At least part of her life. Yes, Calyx replied. And that is the weight of authority misused. It always lands somewhere. A notification buzzed. This one came from an outside address. A journalist. Leora stiffened. That was fast. Calix read the message carefully. It was respectful, curious, dangerous. Someone had leaked enough for questions to start forming. They found the edge, Calix said. Now they're pressing on it. Senna's voice wavered. Are we ready for that? Calix met her eyes. We prepared for this before we ever boarded that plane. She stood and walked to the window. Below, traffic crawled along wet streets. She thought of the cabin again, the tight air, the pointing finger, the silence that followed. Her phone rang, again. This time the caller ID showed a name she did not expect. Maris Holt. Calix answered. Hello. Maris's voice came through, steady but worn. I wanted you to hear this from me, not through channels. I'm listening, Calix said. Elo and Price resigned this morning, Maris said, before the suspension could become permanent. Calix closed her eyes briefly. Thank you for telling me. There's more, Maris continued. She submitted a written statement. She didn't deny anything. She named it. Bias. All of it. That surprised Calix. Why are you telling me this? Because, Maris said, it matters who tells the truth when it costs them something. They ended the call quietly. Senna watched Calix's face. Was that good news? It was honest news, Calix said. That's rarer. By midday, the pressure increased. A second journalist reached out, then a third. Screens filled with drafts of statements from the airline, each softer than the last. Words like regret, miscommunication, isolated incident appeared again and again. Leora slammed her hand lightly on the table. They still don't get it. They do, Calix said. They just don't want to say it. Another call came in, this time from Neris Vale. Her voice was calm but urgent. The board wants to propose a compromise. Calix sighed. Of course they do. They're offering expanded training and a public apology, Neris said, but they want to control the language. No, Calix replied immediately. They say it's the only way to protect the airline. Calix's voice hardened. Then let them decide what matters more, protection or repair. When the call ended, the room felt heavier. Senna whispered, What if they turn this on us? They will try, Calix said. Power does not like mirrors. Leora stood beside her. Then we hold the mirror. Steady. Calix nodded. She looked at her sisters. Really looked at them. Tired. Brave. Unwilling to bend. Outside, the city clouds thickened. A storm was forming, slow and sure. And this time, it was not just in the sky. The storm broke in the afternoon, not with rain, but with headlines. Calix saw it first on a small screen notification that flashed and vanished before she could read the full line. She opened it again, slower this time. The words were careful, but the meaning was sharp. Passengers allege misconduct on Skyward Vale flight. Internal review underway. Leora leaned over her shoulder. They went public. Yes, Calix said, but not fully. Senna's hands curled into the sleeves of her sweater. They're still hiding. They're testing the water, Calix replied, seeing how much they can say without changing anything. More alerts followed. Different outlets. Different tones. Some focused on the airline. Others focused on the passengers. A few mentioned the Santa hats. Almost like a detail meant to soften the story, to turn it into something small and seasonal. That's wrong, Senna said. It wasn't about the hats. No, Leora agreed. The hats just made it visible. The phone rang again. This time, it was not a board member or a journalist. It was a number Calix recognized but had never saved. She answered. Yes? A man spoke on the other end, his voice formal and measured. This is Aldrin Cove, acting chair of Skyward Vale Aviation. I would like to speak with you directly. Calix stepped into the quiet of the hallway. Then speak. There was a pause. We are facing significant pressure, Aldrin said. Sponsors are calling. Regulators are watching. Good, Calix replied. Aldrin exhaled slowly. We are prepared to accept the majority of your terms. Majority, Calix repeated. Yes, Aldrin said, but we need discretion. We need time. Calix's voice stayed calm. You have had time. What you need now is accountability that can be seen. Aldrin's tone tightened. You must understand the risk you are creating. Calix's reply came without delay. The risk was already there. You just ignored it. Silence followed, long, strained. Finally, Aldrin spoke again, quieter this time. What do you want made public? Calix thought of the cabin, the pointing finger, the fallen hat, the silence after. The truth, she said. In full, not edited, not softened. And if we refuse? Aldrin asked. Calix did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. Then others will speak for you. The call ended without agreement. Calix returned to the room where Leora and Senna waited. They read her face immediately. They didn't fold, Leora said. No, Calix replied. They bent. Senna sank into the couch. I'm tired. I know, Calix said gently. So am I. Another message arrived, this one unexpected. It was from Elwyn Price. Calix hesitated before opening it. The message was short, plain, no excuses. I told the truth, all of it. Whatever happens next, you were right to stand where you did. Calix read it twice, then set the phone down. She wrote, Calix said quietly. Leora looked up. What did she say? That she told the truth. Senna nodded slowly. That matters. Yes, Calix agreed. It does. By evening, the story had grown. Passenger footage appeared online, blurred but clear enough to show the raised voice, the pointing hand, the three girls sitting still. Comments poured in, some angry, some defensive. Many relieved to see what they had felt but never named. The board issued a second statement. This one was longer, heavier. It admitted failure. It named bias. It promised change. It's still missing something, Leora said after reading it. Calix nodded. Ownership. As, if summoned by the word, another call came in. This time it was Neris Vale. They're ready, Neris said. Full statement. Full terms. They want you present when it's released. When? Calix asked. Tomorrow morning. Calix closed her eyes for a moment. The weight of the past days pressed in, but beneath it was something steadier. Then we'll be there, she said. After the call, the sisters sat together in silence. Outside, rain finally began to fall, tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. Senna spoke first. Do you think this will stop it? For real? Calix looked out at the darkened street below. No, she said honestly, but it will slow it, and it will make it harder to pretend. Leora reached for her hand. That's enough for now. Calix squeezed back. Tomorrow would bring more eyes, more words, more pressure. But tonight, they had held the line, and it had held back. Morning arrived without ceremony. No, sunlight streamed through the windows. The sky stayed flat and gray, like it was holding its breath. Calix Rowan woke before her alarm, already alert, her mind running through everything that could still go wrong. In the kitchen, Leora stood barefoot on the cold floor, reading updates on her tablet. Senna sat at the table, staring into a bowl of untouched cereal. They scheduled it for 9, Leora said. Live release. Calix nodded. They want control of the moment. Senna looked up. Do we have any? Calix poured herself a glass of water. Enough. They dressed simply. Dark coats, clean lines, no statements in fabric or color. The Santa hat stayed folded in Calix's bag, untouched. The drive to the building was quiet. Halvor Dane focused on the road, saying nothing. Outside, the city moved with its usual urgency, unaware that a decision made in a small room would ripple outward by noon. Inside the Skyward Vale offices, the atmosphere felt tight. Staff members moved quickly, voices low. Eyes followed the sisters as they walked past, not with curiosity now, but recognition. Some looked relieved, others looked afraid. Neris Vale met them at the elevator. They're all here, she said. Every division lead, legal, communications. And the board? Leora asked. Neris nodded. Front row. The conference room was larger than the last. Cameras lined the back wall. Screens were already lit, feeds queued and waiting. At the long table sat Aldrin Covey and 6 others, their expressions controlled but strained. Calix took her seat without waiting to be invited. Leora and Senna sat beside her. Aldrin cleared his throat. "We will begin shortly," he said. "Once this goes live, there is no revision." "That's the point," Calix replied. The countdown began. 10 seconds. 5. The red light blinked on. Aldrin spoke first, reading from prepared text. He acknowledged the incident. He named the failure. He said the word bias clearly, without hedging. That alone caused a visible reaction across the room. Calix watched his face as he spoke. She could tell which parts were hard for him, which ones cost him something. Then he finished and turned slightly toward her. "Ms. Rowan," he said, "you asked to address this directly." Calix stood. Her voice was steady. "What happened on that flight was not unique. It was familiar. Many people watching this have felt it before, even if they could not name it. Authority used without care. Assumptions treated as fact." She paused, letting the words settle. "We were not harmed because we were unprepared," she continued. "We were harmed because the system allowed it. Today is not about punishment, it is about responsibility." A murmur spread, quiet but real. Leora stood next. "Change does not come from statements alone. It comes from records, from listening, from accepting discomfort." Senna followed, her voice softer, but clear. "And it comes from believing people the first time they speak." Aldrin nodded slowly. "The board accepts the conditions presented," he said. "Independent review, external training oversight, a public reporting line." The words landed. Calix sat back down, her hands resting flat on the table. The cameras continued to roll for a few moments longer, then the feeds went dark. No one spoke at first. Then someone in the back of the room exhaled, long and shaky. Outside, the response came fast. Messages flooded in. Support, criticism, relief, anger. The story spread beyond the airline, beyond the city. In the hours that followed, Calix barely looked at her phone. She watched the room instead, watched people adjust, watched the weight of responsibility settle where it belonged. By afternoon, the sisters stepped back out into the gray light. The building doors closed behind them, with a quiet final sound. Senna hugged herself. "Is it done?" Calix shook. Her head. "No, but it's moving." Leora smiled faintly. "That's more than most days." They walked away together, their steps in sync. Behind them, Skyward Vale Aviation began a process it could no longer escape. Audits, reviews, voices long ignored finally counted. Ahead of them, the city opened up again, wide and imperfect. And somewhere on another flight, someone would sit down and feel a little safer than they had before. Not because of a headline, but because three sisters refused to stay silent when it would have been easier to disappear. Weeks passed, and the noise slowly changed. What had once been sharp and chaotic settled into something steadier, like a deep current beneath the surface. The headlines faded first. Then the debates cooled. But the changes that followed did not fade at all. Inside Skyward Vale Aviation, the shifts were impossible to ignore. Training rooms stayed full long after their schedules should have ended. New faces appeared in review. Panels, people with no ties to old habits or quiet favors. Complaint records that had once gathered dust were reopened, read carefully and answered at last. For some employees, it felt like a reckoning. For others, it felt like relief. Maris Holt noticed the difference on her very next flight. Crew meetings sounded different. People listened longer. Interruptions stopped. The word assumption was spoken carefully now, as if it carried weight. When a passenger raised a concern, it was written down without argument. Maris thought of the Rowan sisters often, not because of the drama, but because of how calm they had been when calm was hardest. Elowen Price followed the changes from a distance. She no longer wore a uniform. Her days felt strange without the strict rhythm she had once relied on. At first, she avoided the news, the comments, the opinions. But one evening, sitting alone in her small apartment, she opened a report released by the airline. She read every word. It did not excuse her. It did not soften what she had done. But it named it. Bias, misuse of authority, failure of oversight. Elowen closed the report and rested her head in her hands. For the first time, she did not feel defensive. She felt responsible. It was a heavy feeling, but it was honest. She began volunteering with a local training group that worked with service workers across different industries. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, she told the truth. Not to be forgiven, but to be clear. Change, she learned, did not always feel good. Sometimes it felt like losing the version of yourself you thought was right. Across the city, Calix, Leora, and Senna Rowan returned to their routines. Schoolwork, meetings, quiet evenings. From the outside, nothing about them seemed remarkable. But people who recognized them watched with new eyes. They did not chase attention. They declined interviews they did not trust. They answered questions carefully only when it served the work. One afternoon, the three sisters sat together in a small cafe near the river. Outside, water moved slow and steady, reflecting a pale sky. Senna stirred her drink absently. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" she asked. Leora considered the question. "I wish it didn't need to," she said, "but I don't wish we walked away." Calix watched the river. "What happened on that plane wasn't the start," she said. "It was a reminder." Senna nodded. "Of what?" "Of how easily power forgets who it's meant to serve," Calix replied. A woman at the next table leaned over hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "I hope this isn't strange, but thank you." Calix turned toward her. "For what?" "For standing your ground," the woman said. "Something like that happened to my son last year. We didn't know what to do." Leora's expression softened. "I'm sorry that happened." The woman smiled sadly. "Seeing you speak up helped me understand that silence wasn't my fault." She stood and left, but her words stayed. That evening, Calix pulled the Santa hats from her bag when they returned home. She laid them out on the table, smoothing the fabric carefully. Leora smiled. "You still keeping those?" "Yes," Calix said. "They remind me." "Of the flight?" Senna asked. "Of the moment before it," Calix replied. "When we were just excited kids, not symbols." Senna reached out and touched one of the hats. "I miss that feeling." Calix nodded. "So do I." But she also knew something else. That innocence had not been taken. It had been protected, reshaped into awareness. Months later, Skyward Vale Aviation released a public report. Not polished, not perfect, honest. It showed numbers that made people uncomfortable. It admitted mistakes that could no longer be denied. Other airlines began asking questions. Quietly at first, then openly. Change did not. Spread like fire. It spread like water. Slow. Persistent. Finding every crack. On a winter morning, nearly a year after the flight, Calix boarded another plane. Different city. Different crew. She wore no hat this time. Just a simple coat. As she took her seat, a flight attendant paused beside her. "Good morning," the attendant said warmly. "If there's anything you need, please let me know." Calix smiled. "Thank you." The attendant moved on, and the moment passed without tension, without fear. As the plane lifted into the sky, Calix looked out the window at the clouds below. They stretched endlessly, soft and bright. She thought of that first flight, the shouting, the silence. The choice to stay present when shrinking would have been easier. Justice, she had learned, did not always arrive with force. Sometimes it arrived with stillness, with patience, with people willing to be seen. The plane leveled out, steady and smooth, and somewhere between the ground and the sky, Calix Rowan felt it clearly. The wave had moved on, but its impact remained. Sometimes injustice doesn't arrive with violence. Sometimes it arrives as a raised voice, a pointed finger, or a rule used without care. And most of the time, it survives because people are told to stay quiet, to move on, to not make trouble. But justice does not begin with power. It begins with presence, with the courage to stay standing when the world expects you to shrink. The Rowan sisters didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They didn't ask for revenge. They asked for accountability. And that was enough to shift an entire system. If this story moved you, remember this. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be cruel to be heard. And you don't need permission to demand respect. Every wave of justice starts small, but when it keeps moving, it reshapes everything in its path. If you believe stories like this matter, support Waves of Justice by liking this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel because as long as injustice exists, these stories must be told. We'll see you in the next wave.